All right, this is part two, folks. Our first part of our American women losing, we hope was pretty good. Now this is part two. I'm going to try to sort of run through this as quick as we can. Lots of stuff to go over because there's so much really cool information. I think so that we don't have to do a part three. So hopefully we'll get through this pretty fast. In the first one, we talked briefly about modern prominent social media male influencers and what they're talking about, and that they're actually talking locker talk, men's issues, and a lot of these guys explain that it's for years men have not have had social platforms or magazines, Vogue magazine or Women's Health, or that women have had those platforms and men haven't had any platforms, and that social media, particularly in just the last few years, a lot of men are becoming more and more prevalent addressing men's issues that they say men haven't been able to address. I think that's very, very interesting. We also went over the 5 things that Kevin Samuels always uses, what he calls the 5 things that American men want in a woman. I don't know if he coined those 5 things or if he got it from somebody else, but the 5 things that he says American men want is they want a woman who is fit, physically fit, feminine, friendly, cooperative, and submissive. Now let's do those again just to make sure nobody missed anything. He says that American men want, for the most part, of course, we have to always say not all, as Jesse Lee Peterson says, but the overwhelming majority of American men, they want a woman who is fit, feminine, friendly, cooperative, and submissive. Now, in the first video we went over fit, feminine, friendly, cooperative, but we didn't. The video got kind of long, so we stopped and we did not do submissive. So we're going to start out with submissive in this video, and then at the tail end go over some other male stuff. To start with the submissive part, I would first, what do I have? And I have my computer right here, so that if you see me looking here, that because I did like a brief outline so we could stay on track. The first thing that we want to start out with is a guy called Andrew Tate. He's a 4-time world champion kickboxer. He's 35 years old. He's been, what do you call that? Not silenced. I'll think of the word in a minute. Silenced on social media, a lot of social media. He makes this really, really great point that some of the other guys talk about, that in the poorest countries, the poorest societies in the world today, where survival is the most difficult, that survival is the most difficult, that's where you see the prominence of male and female roles, because that's the best way to survive. That men do men stuff and women do women stuff. In the poorest societies, where life is really, they have to scratch their way through life every day. Kevin Samuels says the same thing in referring to feminism, because he says that feminism only exists in first world countries. Now, just so everybody understands, for the folks who went to public school like me, there's feminine, and then there's feminism or feminist. They're 2 separate things. So hopefully, if you don't know that, you'll understand the differences as we go through here. With Kevin Samuels saying that feminism only exists in first world countries, he says specifically about American women, and that they've come spoiled and they don't know poverty, they don't know deprivation, they don't know survival. And what's really interesting, kind of eye-opening, I guess, is that he says that's why in the poorest countries in the world, that's where we find the most feminine women. That's kind of I was even kind of shocked to hear him say that. What else is he? Let's go back and see what else. Still got Samuels. He has a podcast where he has a lot of women that call into his podcast. And one of the things that I think is just hilarious, because he says a lot of stuff that's shocking, that a lot of people don't agree with. And he has a lot of detractors because they say that he's hyper masculine and his ideas are outdated. They're just old school, and it doesn't apply today. But there was and I actually was watching one of his podcasts, one of his videos, and he had a female caller, and she said, well, me and my boyfriend, we have a 50-50 relationship. Anything we want to talk about, finances, if we have a problem, it's 50-50. And the girlfriend, the woman, she said, I always let my boyfriend, we always talk everything out. We talk about everything. And if we have a problem, we just talk about it. And if we can't find a solution, and she said, the lady said, if we can't find a solution, I let him have the last word. And Kevin Samuels said on the phone call, he said, no. I don't have the last word. I have the only word. Very harsh. He's kind of, again, like I say, he's got a lot of detractors because they say he's over masculine. His ideas are outdated. That's Kevin Samuels. But Jesse Lee Peterson is a Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson. He has a podcast also. He says that the 50-50 thing sounds good. And we just heard 50-50 for the last 30, 40 years, I guess, that's really become more and more and more prominent. And that these guys say men know that's bullcrap. Women can say 50-50, but men just sit there and go, okay, yeah, whatever. To add to what Kevin Samuels says when he says, I don't have the last word, I have the only word. I should add one more thing. I had a Filipina friend, it was just a couple of years ago. It surprised me that she said, who lives in the Philippines, she said, I want a man to tell me what to do. It was a friend of mine that lived in the Philippines. That was surprising for me to hear. For her to hear her say, I want a man to tell me what to do. Well, Jesse Lee Peterson adds to that and says, it's 50-50 until a burglar comes in the house. And the husband is supposed to be in front, addressing the burglar. And you, as the wife, your place is behind the husband, protecting the children. What a interesting analogy. Two of my favorite comedians, Bill Burr and Dave Chappelle, also specifically address the 50-50 concept. Both of them talk about the Titanic. That it was, let's see what we got here. In 1912, there were 2,240 passengers and crew, and more than, when the Titanic went down, more than 1,500 died. Well, because as the Titanic was sinking, they did not have enough lifeboats. So what they did is they said, okay, women and children first. And the men were expected to stay on the boat. That's not 50-50. Feminism kind of dies when the ship is sinking. I can't remember which one. I think it's Bill Burr that said during the hostage situation, when the hostage negotiator, let's say you got 15, 20 people taken hostage in the bank, when the hostage negotiator or negotiators show up, what's the first thing they say? Please at least release the women and children. There were no feminists in that bank that day. That's very interesting. And I said all the way through the first video, make sure and comment. We need to see your comments below and see what you agree with, or what you think applies, what doesn't apply, what is fair, what's not fair. And this all goes to the submissive part of what Samuels talks about. And again, fit, feminine, friendly, cooperative, and submissive. That's the last one. Samuels, another in-your-face one, that he talks about is that he says, modern women don't know how to act, number one. And that modern men don't, his words, they don't know how to check their women. That's kind of surprising to hear somebody say that. But he says, think about going to a department store or a grocery store and see how loud some of these women are. Even if the husband and wife are together, who's the most dominant? Who's the loudest? Who's the most aggressive? And he goes into other things that he talks about how abusive, verbally and physically abusive, that women are to men, and that's a whole other topic. May do a video about that. But again, he says American men no longer know how to check their women. Surprising to hear. You think from Kevin Samuels, but Jordan Peterson says the exact same thing. Let me get his wording. And he's the in the first the part one we explained or gave Jordan a brief bio for Jordan Peterson. He says that it's feminine to think from your feelings. That's why women say, well, this is how I feel, or I feel like this, I feel like that, because they're actually saying what they're thinking, because that's how they think. They think from their feelings, because women are nurturing for the most part. They're nurturing and they're play a motherly role, and that's the natural. Not all, as Jesse Lee Peterson would say, but mostly. But that's a feminine, the feminine aspect. I feel like this. Well, I feel like that. Well, this is how I feel. But most men, they think from a masculine perspective, which is to think logically. That men analyze, they think logically. They don't do the I feel like this, I feel like that. They think about things, what's that, and they'll say, well, that doesn't make any sense. What's the data? Give me some statistics. Let me see the data. That's really interesting to hear a clinical psychologist explain that. And I hope that some of you will look up Jordan Peterson and see how he explains that. Let's see. We just said Kevin Samuels says that American men they no longer know how to check their women. Well, Jordan Peterson says the same thing. He says that there's many men in America today that, his words, Jordan Peterson, he says that they allow women to talk over them, and they shouldn't. But he said what's happening in those cases, a husband, wife, and the wife is just yak, talking over her husband, and the husband tries to say something, and she interrupts him, and he tries to say something else, and she interrupts him, so he finally he'll just be quiet while she just goes yak. Jordan Peterson, the psychologist, he says that comes from women expressing their feelings. That's why they do that, expressing their feelings. And his not my words, his words. He says that men need to learn how to say, whoa. Don't talk over me. I'm talking, you be quiet. That's interesting to hear nowadays. But that's what men talk about. That's why earlier I said locker talk. I think I said it also in the first video, that these guys that are online now and talking about men's issues, and it's very interesting to hear. Now, we're going to go real quick, go over Kevin Samuels and what he calls sexual marketplace value. And this is not anything vulgar, but it's sexual marketplace value. What that is a score of men and women, and where do you fall in the marketplace, in the sexual marketplace, like dating or potential for marriage, or do I want to date him, or do I want to date her? Is she my type? Or that we all do that. We all kind of grade people on the scale of 1 to 10. He says, if you say, men and women, if you use a scale of 1 to 10, that most people in America are a 5 or a 6, which makes sense. 5 or 6, that means you're average. 5 or 6 is average. And he shows on his podcast all the time. He has women who he talks with the women and they agree. Samuels and the woman will agree that woman is a 4 or a 5 or a 6. But those women want a man who is 8, 9, or 10. And he explains how utterly ridiculous that is. Because if we're going to talk about sexual marketplace value, Samuel uses the term high value men. That's men up in 8. They would rank 8, 9, or 10. In the first video, part 1, we went into that even further. That high value men they're more established. They make more money. They're older because obviously if you're making more money, you're further in your career, so you're going to be a little bit older. But those are high value men. Let's see, no expensive, but no high expensive. And talking about high value men, that women who are, Samuel says, they can be a 4, 5, or 6, and they're in their 30s or 40s, which is getting old for a woman. They have a bunch of kids, they're overweight. Well, men who are 8s and 9s and 10s, high value men, are not going to choose women like that. They're going to choose not a woman in her 30s or 40s. They're going to choose a woman in her 20s who has no kids and who's very attractive. That's the kind of women that high value men choose for the most part. Because, be specific and use Kevin Samuels' words, that high value men have options. They have options. If you have a man who's a 4 or 5 or 6, that we have to be honest with ourselves that those men don't have very many options. So they have to choose women who are 4, 5, and 6. So this is an average man. He has to choose. The women he has to choose from are average. He's an average man, so he's going to get an average woman or a little bit below average woman. And then that men accept that. Samuel says you'll find that men accept that, but women will not. They will not accept it, because women, she can be a 5, and if you say, okay, here's a bunch of men, they're all 5s. This is for you to choose from. You're going to marry, you're going to date, whatever. That the woman will say a 5. I don't want to settle for a 5. I want an 8 or a 9. And he takes real issue with that, to say the woman is a 5 and she says she has to settle for a man who's a 5. Well, if he goes into a long explanation about that. A number 5 woman who rates number 5 and she wants a male who's 8, 9, or 10. That guy's going to get a woman who's 8, 9, or 10. And he goes even further into that and says for women, this is a really interesting concept. For women, 18 to 26, that's your prime age. That's your prime in the sexual marketplace, your prime dating, marriage age. And high value men, that's the women that they choose if they are fit, feminine, friendly, cooperative, and submissive. And he says 18 to 26, that's you're at your high mark if you're a female. Now you go to 30, your sexual marketplace value drops a little bit. If you go to 40, it drops even more. If you have 1 kid, it drops. If you have 2 kids, it drops. You have a 3rd kid, it drops. If you have a 4th kid, it drops. So for women, there's all these things that makes your sexual marketplace value drop. But the most interesting, and of course all the other stuff we know, but the interesting one for me is for him when he says, for a woman, the older she gets, her sexual marketplace value goes down. But for men, it's the opposite. The older a man gets, his sexual marketplace value goes up for the most part, because a man establishes himself, he grows in his career, he's making more money, he's establishing, laying a foundation. That's why those men can choose women who are 23, 25, 26. And I'll give you an example. I was single just a few years ago, and I was openly dating, and I got a lot of nasty messages from women saying a few female friends that I had that were younger, and females in their 40s and 45 and 50 saying, Keith, you're 50 years old. No 25-year-old girl is going to want you. You're 50 years old. You're an old man. And I thought, well, you don't know what you're talking about, because I was having to beat them off with a stick. 25 years old. I was having to beat them off with a stick. So it baffles me that women in their 40s or 40, 45, they think that men in their 50s, young women who are in their mid or early 20s don't want anything to have with an older man. That's just nuts. Because women who are that young, most of them, if the women are high value, they're going to choose a man who is high value. Well, that man is going to be higher value. He has established himself more. He has more money. But that's if the young lady, let's say she's 23, 24, if she's a high value woman. Now, if she's a low value woman, she's going to have to settle for a low value man, an average man. If she's average or below average, especially, she's going to have to settle for a man who's average or below average. And that's just the truth of it. A lot of us never really think about that, how the keg, how those wheels operate. But it's very interesting stuff. And when he explains that stuff, he always had, Samuel's on his podcast, he always has women to say, well, you say I'm average, but I have no problem finding men to date. And he says, yeah, you have no problem finding men who to date, who they'll go have sex with you, but none of them are wanting to marry you. Are you married? And they'll say, no. See, you say you have no problem finding men. No, you have no problem finding men who will take you to go eat dinner and have sex with you, but they don't want anything else from you because you're average. Very, very interesting. One other one that I think is really interesting, he says about American women, that so many American women today, and it's of course, it's women who are, their sexual marketplace value is average or below average. Those are the very women who say, where have all the good men gone? Samuels says, I'll tell you exactly where they're gone. They're avoiding you. You're average, so they're avoiding you. They're not. You think, where have all the good men gone? They're not chasing you, so you don't know about them. They're out there. They're just avoiding you. That was kind of mind blowing. He's kind of out there, and he says some wild, crazy stuff. Those men are avoiding you. Now, I can't remember who it was, maybe one of the comedians, talking about fat. In America, we call fat shaming. And that it's almost, I don't know if we have the statistics down a little bit later in my notes, but almost half of American women are overweight. But you'll see these women, this is not me. Samuels says this. He said, you'll see these women on social media wearing like overly sexy clothes, and they're overweight. But their friends, their female friends, will get on their social media and say, oh, you look so beautiful. You go, girl. You living your best life. And they're overweight. And I think maybe it was Bill Burr. Maybe it was Bill Burr who said, we say that about fat,